It was one more sign that the end was near. Shortly after the last American bombers headed for home, Adolf Hitler emerged for his traditional birthday celebration. Instead of the customary parade of 40,000 soldiers, the Führer, his eyes glassy and his hands trembling, was greeted by a handful of Hitler Youth and SS. After this bizarre valediction, the Führer would never be seen in public again. Forward elements of Zhukov's first Belarusian front had already begun to shell the center of Berlin. For Russian artillerymen, it was an unmistakable sign that victory was near. The message was not lost on senior Nazi officials. They fled the city in droves, taking with them as many valuables as they could. 2 million ordinary citizens had no such hope. For men, even the very young and the very old, the penalty for trying to leave was death.
Rated M for mature.
Hello, boys. Welcome to Holland. They say you've got a big plan to win the war.
The day after Marshal Konev's spearheads penetrated the Berlin suburbs, his prize already in range of his guns, Stalin, at a stroke, dashed his hopes of being hailed as the conqueror of the Nazi enemy. Zhukov was to take the Reichstag, the outstanding symbol of German might. Konev's line would be allowed no closer than 150 yards. Throughout the ranks of his first Ukrainian front, there was bitter disappointment. The men would still have to fight and die, but the laurels would go elsewhere. On April the 24th, units of 1st Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts met southwest of Berlin. The capital was surrounded. The same day, American and Russian troops met on the River Elbe. Germany had been cut in two. By April the 25th, Zhukov and Konev had regrouped their forward units in Berlin for siege warfare. There was no pause in the fighting, while the Russian commanders prepared for the last act in the battle for Berlin. Between them, they were ringing the inner city with almost 500,000 men, 12,700 guns, 21,000 rocket launchers, and 1,500 tanks. The ferocious barrage unleashed on the German defensive perimeter, although it killed thousands of defenders and civilians, served only to make the central districts even more formidable obstacles than they had been before. Fanatical SS units, backed by artillery and dug-in tanks, contested every strong point, often to the last man. Thousands of Hitler Youth, armed with Panzerfausts, made the streets death traps for Soviet tanks. Around the Tempelhof aerodrome, on the south side of the city, fighting was particularly ferocious. The Russians were haunted by the fear that Hitler, whose whereabouts were still unknown, would use one of several aircraft kept in an underground bunker to escape from their clutches. After a determined assault, by noon on April the 26th, the runways and buildings were in Soviet hands, and the aerodrome's commandant had been captured. As the Red Army pressed ever closer to the heart of Berlin, seemingly careless of the cost, desperate German defenders resorted to creating obstacles by destroying everything in the path of the Russians. With so many streets blocked with rubble, the Soviets were forced to blast their way forward by dynamiting holes in the walls of houses, or tunneling beneath the city from one cellar to another. Only then could they pass from street to street. One by one, often after brutal hand-to-hand fighting, German bunkers, pillboxes and strongpoints were eliminated. Some Germans surrendered, elderly Volkssturm and reservists most readily, but others, particularly units of SS Nordland and Charlemagne, clung on grimly to every mound of rubble. Dutch, Danish, Flemings, Norwegians and French, these men had joined the SS to crusade against the Bolsheviks. Now, with their native lands liberated and the Reich crashing down around their heads, there was no option but to fight and die. Even as Russian shells pounded his Reich's chancellery, Hitler, in his bunker 55 feet below, continued to believe that at any moment General Wenck's 12th Army would save the day. Although hundreds, possibly thousands of people were dying every hour, there was no thought of surrender. General Karl Wiedling, battle commandant of Berlin, reported to Hitler that there was now only 2 days' supply of ammunition left, and the wounded were dying for lack of food and medicine. Wiedling's suggestion that the remnants of his forces, spearheaded by the remaining tanks and assault guns, should break out to the west, was angrily dismissed by Hitler. By the night of the 29th, the fighting was less than a quarter of a mile from Adolf Hitler's bunker. There, the Führer dictated his last will and testament. Field Marshal Schörner, struggling far to the south with the remnants of his Army Group Center, was made the last commander-in-chief of the German army. Hitler himself, fanatical opposition.